Hello and welcome to the February edition of Anglo-Irish Astro Geeks. My thanks to Pico for supplying that beautiful music that starts and finishes our show. And without further ado, we'll get started with the show. So I'm Nicky Vetts.
I'm Angela, Astronomy Ireland.
I'm Susan McKeown, Astronomy Ireland.
I'm Caroline Garrity, Astronomy Ireland.
And I'll hand over to Anne for the what's new in the sky tonight.
Well, sorry, I was having a little giggle there. Right. So it's a bit of a quiet time for planet viewing at the moment. If you might have been able to see something in the early mornings. We've seen Mercury, Venus fairly bright, Mars very faint on the horizon, but we've also had a couple of nice evening moon conjunctions. We had Uranus on the 7th of February and the Pleiades 2 nights later, and we had the Castor and Pollux. So I hope people got to see those. Now next Paris Day coming up at 6 a.m. you can see the moon just starting to wane very close to Antares. So if we're still talking about mornings, of course. But if you have a chance, if you have a look, start looking at around 4 a.m. If anyone is up. And you'll see them rising in the southeast, but the best time to see them would be around 6 o'clock in the morning. Then Mercury, all the planets are kind of, a bit dull at the moment. It's furthest from the sun at the moment, so it's not very visible to us. It's only rising just a little bit before the sun, so there's very little time to see it. Now Venus, on the other hand, has been delighting people early mornings. It's extremely bright, and it'll be climbing higher each morning as the month goes on. Check out the sort of southeast horizon, and you might have actually seen some photos of Venus through the dense cloud. We'll be covering that in our magazine. Then Mars is really low and faint in the morning skies. It's not really easy to see. It's in Sagittarius, and it's the same, rising up not long before the sun, and it's very faint. Jupiter has been an evening object, but it's setting by 7 in the evening now, and it's going out of view, and it's going to be lining up with the sun on March the 5th. So we're not going to really see this gas giant for a little while till it comes back into morning views. Saturn is the same. It's lining up with the sun, so it's too low for anything. You might get to see a thin crescent, see it with the thin crescent moon on February the 28th, and Uranus is also hard to see. The only one actually that was a bit visible was Neptune, but it's fading too. So basically, if you have a look at the stars, there's great things to look at. Orion is actually beautiful at the moment in the south, kind of mid-evening, and you don't need any help to see it. And it's beginning to head off to the west, so make most of it while you can. And it's a good time now to download any of those sky apps that you can get on your phone. They're all free, most of them, and see what stars and constellations you can spot, such as Castor and Pollux, which we mentioned above Orion. Then other things to look at. The sun has been very active lately and producing quite a few auroras. I'm sure Caroline has even photographed them. And so watch out for aurora alerts, and you might be able to photograph them in northern skies. And the only other thing that you could watch out for is the constellation Leo in the east, and of course the Plough, the asterism of the Plough. And the two stars closest to the handle of the Plough, Pointer Regulus, which is the brightest star in Leo, might help you to find it. And the other thing that's good at the moment there is the Beehive Cluster. And other than that, it's a bit of a dull month, February, but we'll have more next month. But in the meantime, we now have a very special guest, Herb Baker, and everyone's going to be asking him lots of questions. So that's my part over.
Well, thank you, Anne, for the sky notes. So this week we have a very special guest. So without further ado, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, yes. My name is Herb Baker, and I recently retired from NASA after working for them for 42 years, mostly at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. But I also spent a year at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and about 10 years at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The first thing I should point out, though, is even though I worked for NASA, I was certainly not an astronaut or a scientist or an engineer. I was a business guy, and I think a lot of people don't think about it or realize that actually about a third of the NASA employees are, finance, business, HR, IT, and today social media, that kind of thing. So obviously I got to work with scientists, engineers, doctors, and astronauts every day, and I loved every minute of it. I almost hated to leave after 42 years, but I was 65 at that point, and I guess I felt like I should give someone else an opportunity to have as much fun as I did. And so today, after being retired for a few years, I'm still staying very much involved in NASA activities. I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League, which of course is retired former NASA employees that gets together and we promote STEM education. And I also do a lot of volunteering, Space Center Houston and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation and a few others. So definitely staying involved and keeping up with what NASA's doing.
Yes, I was just looking at some of the projects you've worked on. You're involved with the ISS and you're involved with the space shuttle, which, as memory serves me, was brought in by Richard Nixon to succeed the Apollo program.
Yes, that's true. Actually, the early 1970s. I think they awarded the first space shuttle contract in 1972. It was 72 or 74. Of course, it didn't fly for the first time until 1981, but not surprising that it took that long. That was a huge developmental project. In fact, that was one of my first assignments after I started working for NASA in 1975. But actually, the first was, other than rotating around and just kind of learning more about NASA, working in various offices, first real assignment was working on what they call the EMU, Extravehicular Mobility Unit, which is a spacesuit. And I did that for a couple of years, and then it was 1979, 2 years before the first shuttle flight, that I was assigned to the Space Shuttle Orbiter procurement section. So I was in an office, a group. There were about 8 or 10 of us. Our job was actually to buy the Space Shuttle Orbiters, which is, a crazy thought for me that one of my early jobs was buying space shuttles. But then again, as you mentioned, I worked on worked in the space station program as early as 1985, which was, close to 15 years before it was finally built and finished. So that was very early in the station program, and actually I kind of went back and forth. I mentioned I worked at different centers, and so I worked in the shuttle program, and then station, and then back to shuttle, and then back to station, and then back to shuttle again, and then eventually worked on the Orion program also. And in the last 10 years or so of my career, I was out of the what we call the programs, shuttle station, Orion, and started supporting flight operations, which at the time I was a little uneasy about, because I had spent the first 30 years of my career working on the three big programs, and this was more not involved with one particular program. It was all the programs, and working with the astronaut office and mission control and astronaut training and the aircraft operations and that kind of thing. But boy, I loved that. I was so glad I got to do that the last 10 years or so. And so of course, supporting the astronaut office, I got to even more so than I had before, work with and become friends and get to know lots of the astronauts. And of course, Caroline may know, it's a little bit about my earlier years. I think I grew up with astronauts. I've always felt really lucky about that. Growing up at that place at that time, I was I was 12 years old. I wasn't even a teenager yet when they opened what was called then the Manned Spacecraft Center. It's now the Johnson Space Center, just 6 miles from my house. And so all of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, and by that time they had a second class of astronauts they had selected, and they all moved into my community. And so I literally, grew up and was in middle school with the kids who were my age of the first 2 classes of astronauts. I played on the 7th grade football team, American football, not soccer, with Frank Borman's son Fred and with Scott Carpenter's son Jay, and again became friends with many more of them through the rest of middle school and high school and college and today now with social media, I've become friends and got to know most of the astronauts kids who I didn't even know back then. Because it's kind of one big happy family now, and we get together at different space events, around the country.
Herb, can we just, it's so brilliant to have you on. Your stories are amazing, but can we just kind of rewind back to that time you growing up as a kid? You were friends with the astronauts kids, and you were growing up together in that area. I'm sure to them, the way it is now with social media, everything is, the spotlight is on. But probably to them growing up, that was just a normal thing. That's just my dad going to space. What was it like for you with those children? I'm sure that you were really inspired, with your interest in space, obviously, and growing up with those kids. What was that actually like? And to them, was it just normal, or was it a big thing?
Yes, it was just normal. I have kind of a funny story about that, but yes, and not just astronauts, of course. Just like today, there are hundreds and thousands of NASA employees who aren't astronauts. But so almost, in the community I ended up growing up in, almost every one of my friends, even if they weren't an astronaut's child, their mother or father were NASA in some way. You were either a NASA employee or worked for a NASA contractor. So all of us seemed connected in one way. And of course, that's another story I can tell is, even my mother contributed to the. It was my mother, not my father, who contributed to the space program. But yes, the funny story I mentioned was, and I don't remember who it was, no names, but I remember hearing something about in the neighborhood where almost every other house was an astronaut family. Some kid saying something to or a parent saying something to a kid about their father, astronaut, going to space, and that was really cool. And what did you think about that? And the kid, very young, of course, probably 6 or 7 years old, stopped for a minute and thought, well, isn't everybody's father an astronaut?
It's just not so normal.
Yeah, clearly, just as you were saying, that it was no big deal. That was just a part of everyday life. And of course, even today, because there are many more astronauts today, although the number's not like it was at the height of the shuttle program, but there are probably 30, 40, I don't know the exact number of astronauts, 40, 50 astronauts. And, you can be getting gas at a service station or shopping at a local grocery store, or, I ran into one recently at my eye doctor, and of course, they're not mostly wearing, their flight suits, so you won't even know you're sitting next to an astronaut, where I live now. But and again, of course, I do remember, again, another story about growing up. I was in high school, and you probably know that the first crewed flight was Apollo crewed flight was Apollo 7, and Don Isley was one of the three astronauts, and I ended up hanging around with his daughter, Melinda. You know, we were both in the high school band together. And funny thing, again, we're talking about social media. So, you know, fast forward literally 50 years, because this was back in 1967, 68. Her father flew on Apollo 7 in 1968. I looked her up on social media and found out she lives just down the street from me. And
Wow.
yeah, and so we went had lunch together. This was just before the pandemic hit, so it's been 2.5, 3 years ago now. But it was really nice to see someone again after all those years. And another example of I mentioned the Bormans. I'm still friends today with Frank Borman's two sons, Fred and Ed, and so Fred was in my class. Ed was a year or two younger, but after Apollo 8 and the historic first humans to visit another planet, if you will, in the solar system, if you want to call the moon another celestial body, let's put it that way. I still remember, have a copy of our high school newspaper. There was a photo and a story of Fred and Ed about going with his parents on a worldwide tour that the Apollo 8 astronauts went on after their return home. And so, if I've got time, I'll tell you one more quick story.
Go for it. Yeah.
Go for it. You got all the
Plenty of
time you
time.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So I'm 17 years old, and the summer between my junior and senior years of high school, 1969, and of course that's when Apollo 11 happened, and the first men to walk on the moon. And so I happened to get a long story. I happened to get a job with the TV networks. They would they were based in New York City, and I guess they still are today, actually, but they would send a few people down from New York City and set up a studio on site there at the Manned Spacecraft Center to cover the missions, and it was mostly a lot of just like a newscaster kind of thing, but they did interviews with astronauts and flight directors and other, kind of important NASA people. And so they needed because back then in 1969, there was no such thing as videotape or the internet. And so when they filmed an interview in Houston, you had to literally physically move the film from Houston to New York so they could show it on broadcast it on TV. So my main job was twice a day to drive it was a 100-mile round trip to Intercontinental Airport to drop film off, to have it flown to New York to the studio so they could broadcast it on TV. And I did other things too. Those 2 trips to the airport didn't take the whole 8 hours, but again, that was my main job. And so all that's just background to Apollo. So I actually did that for Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13. I had gone away to university for Apollo 14, but I came back and also covered Apollo 15 and a couple of the Skylab missions. And so for Apollo 12, it's November 1969, and Pete Conrad and Alan Bean and Dick Gordon was the third astronaut, but Pete and Al were the third and fourth guys to walk on the moon. And they're coming back home. They're splashing down in the South Pacific, and the TV network I was working for wanted just a local human interest story. It wasn't something that needed to be flown to New York, because it was just again about our local community. They wanted a video or film of Pete Conrad's family watching on their TV in his living room as the capsule splashed down in the South Pacific at the end of the mission. And so they sent me and a cameraman to Pete Conrad's home, just a few miles from the Space Center. And so we're there in his living room with his family watching on their TV as the Apollo 12 capsule splashed down in the South Pacific. And it's funny because that was over 50 years ago. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. Literally, I could draw you a picture of their house and where the was and where the TV was and where after the filming was done, we walked into the dining room, and I can still picture the cameraman taking the film out of his camera, or putting the camera in a black bag and taking the film out of the camera and putting it in a canister so it wasn't exposed to light. He handed me the canister. I got in my car and drove back a few miles to the Space Center. There was a helicopter waiting for me. The local TV station was so anxious to get that film of Pete Conrad's family watching the splashdown that they didn't even want to wait or take a chance on me driving the 20 miles. So they hired a helicopter to fly me from the Space Center, which is on the very far south end of Houston, to the local TV station. And I still remember that helicopter ride. I'd never been in a helicopter before. I'm 17 years old, and I remember strapping in and the helicopter pilot saying, "Yeah, I just got back from flying missions in Vietnam." Oh boy, this is going to be quite a ride, and it was. I almost felt like he was trying to avoid people shooting at us sometimes, going so fast and so low. But the funny thing is, I remember that whole sequence like it was yesterday. I remember getting out of the helicopter, walking into the TV station, and there was a woman waiting for me. She knew I was coming, of course. And I handed her the film canister, and I don't remember anything after that. It was like the adrenaline just drained from my body. I don't even remember the helicopter ride back home.
How was it back then, Herb? You're doing your film, and that's the Apollo era. The film First Man was Neil Armstrong. They worked very closely with someone to portray the story, and it sort of shows that some of the families were very private. Did you find that, or the families then, wanted to share the story, wanted to be filmed? Compared to how it is now, it's nearly like part of the deal. Families are involved with the current astronauts. Everything's on the media. Everything is, compared to now and then. Did you find a big difference?
Well, yes. As I recall, the families were more annoyed than anything because, and I don't think it doesn't happen so much today, but back then, when they were going to the moon, when one of the families, the astronauts were all men, of course. When one of the fathers was on an Apollo mission, there would be television trucks and other cars and vehicle news people camped out on their front lawns, and their cars stacked up on the streets in front of their house. And so they would if they wanted to go to the grocery store, they would sneak out of their back doors so no one could see them. So it is a little different today. I think again I think it was more like I said, annoyance because it was just almost smothering. The TV news media people, photographers would do anything they could to get a photo of even the children or didn't have to be the spouse. So anyway, I think that is a little bit different than it is today.
Yeah.
Hi Herb, it's Susan here. I'd love to ask a question. Sorry, I'd just love to ask about your mother. I know she was involved with Skylab and the Parasol. What age were you when that happened, and how amazingly interesting was it?
Yes, so that is obviously an interesting story because that was 1973, and I was I had started university by then. I was 21, And the interesting thing about that is, it was kind of a big deal. I mean, she was just one of a team, and there were obviously other people involved in that project to design and develop and create the parasol. Although they did it in 10 days from the day they had the accident until it was launched. 10 days. That just blows my mind. There's no way you could do something like that today, I think. But anyway, what I was going to say is that it's no big deal to her. I do have, I know that we're not doing video, but I've got a photo, the official NASA photo of my mother sitting at the sewing machine. And the parasol was 24 feet by 22 feet, so it took 3 people to help guide it through
That's amazing.
Machine. But again, she never talked about it. In fact, Nicole Stott, one of my favorite astronaut friends, recently it's been 2 years ago now, interviewed me for the BBC. The interview was about seamstresses for the space program, and so it covered Apollo and Skylab and shuttle. And so, one of the questions Nicole asked me was, something along the lines of, what did your mother think about that, or did she ever talk about it? And I thought, well, no, she didn't. It was just, and we never talked about it as a family. I don't remember her ever through the rest of her life. She was only 43 at the time, and she lives to 77. I don't remember her ever saying anything to anyone about that. Again, like so many people, I'm guessing in my mind that it was just, hey, that was just her job, and she was just part of something that was much bigger than just her. And so I'm sure she was very satisfied and happy and proud that it worked, but it wasn't like she felt like she was a celebrity or should be a famous person, or another interesting thing about this, I was interviewed for a part of a documentary, full-length documentary, Searching for Skylab, and of course part of that touched on the parasol, and so they asked me. My mother had passed away by then, and so they asked me to be in the film to talk about it. And so now there are stories, and again with the social media and a movie, and she's becoming something a little bit of a celebrity, but she had no idea. At the time she passed away, she had no idea it would become as well known as it has. But so one last funny thing about that is, so where I grew up, it was an old house, big house, no air conditioning, and it's hot and humid in Houston. We did have lots of trees and fans in the windows and things like that, so it wasn't too bad. But I say all of that to say that I do remember that at some point after they were, or as they were making that parasol, which is the whole purpose of that special material, was very highly reflective, reflects the sun rays. And so she would bring scraps home, and we put it in our windows to help.
Brilliant.
And so I'm thinking about, I would give anything if I'd thought about it back then to save some of that material. Yeah, but I think we were probably the only house in my neighborhood that had Skylab reflective parasol material in our windows, and it's just crazy.
That's a wonderful, amazing. At least to have the memory.
Yeah, I do remember very well, because it was, it was a kind of a silverish reflective color on one side and kind of a bright orange on the other side. So you put the reflective side out, facing outside, and so what you could see was the orange on the inside. Yeah.
You were saying about Skylab.
Your mum would be so proud of you now.
I'm sorry, what?
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. I was about to, I remember the Skylab missions, particularly back in 1973, purely because they were going to try and image a comet
Yes.
It was either Cahutex Comet. No, it was Comet West. Comet West.
Oh, okay.
And that was probably one of the highlights for me. I'm a comet imager. I image the moon and the comets, and occasionally I'll go and do the planets. And it was, I had watched some of the stuff about the early Apollo missions, and the Apollo 7 mission you talked about at the beginning, that was the only manned launch of the Saturn 1B. Because from then on it was the Saturn 5.
Saturn 5, yeah.
But of course commanded by Wally Schirra.
Yes.
Now, was he the joker that he was made out to be? Did he like practical jokes?
You know, I did. I would see him around every once in a while, but you know, again, at my age, and he was not one of the astronauts that I was lucky enough to be around who came in for an interview. I did meet Alan Shepard. He was one of the astronauts that came in when I was working for the TV networks. That came in, and I did take some photos of him. I still have today, sitting down and hooking up the microphone for his interview. This was 1969, 1970, and Pete Conrad was another one, and a few others. But so anyway, all of that to say, I didn't really know Wally as well, but yeah, that's my impression or recollection of what I've heard is that is true, that he was a bit of a jokester.
I think most of us have only really seen that side of him from Tom Hanks's From the Earth to the Moon.
Yes, yes.
But as I say, I was curious just to see how correct they actually got the characterizations of the astronauts.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know that I ever saw all of the episodes, but I just generally, my recollection is that they did a really nice job in all ways, not just the personalities of the astronauts, but reflecting what it was really like, and being true to the people and the places and the things that done with that thing.
Brilliant.
Herb, just to bring you forward a little bit, you said you dropped out for a while to go to college. That sounds weird saying you dropped out to go to college, but what did you study? Like, were you still thinking in terms of staying with the whole NASA thing when you went?
So that's another interesting story. If you don't mind me taking just a minute to tell that.
Plenty of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, yeah. My as far back as I can remember, I was around, NASA people, NASA families, and astronauts in the space program. And again, today I live about 7 miles from the Johnson Space Center. And so it's absolutely been basically a part of my entire life. Although I was never one of those people, and maybe again it was just like we were saying before, that was just normal everyday life. I didn't grow up saying, hey, I want to be an astronaut, because it was like they were all around us, and so science was not my best subject in school. So when I went away to college, university, I was a business major. And so, to be honest, at that time, it never really occurred to me that I could have a career at NASA. Again, I just thought, as much as I, was involved with all of the families in the space community, I think my impression back then, too, was still that, oh, well, gosh, you have to be in sciences, an engineer or a scientist or an astronaut or a doctor to work at NASA. That was just my impression. And so the part of the story is that I just happened to, and so of course you all know that NASA is a U.S. government agency, and to help pay my way through school at the University of Texas in Austin, which is about a 3-hour drive from Houston, I had a temporary part-time job at the Internal Revenue Service, which is another government agency. It just happened that the huge 5-state center for the Internal Revenue Service for 5 states. It was in Austin, Texas. And so anyway, I'm working for the government at this part-time job to help pay my way through school. And because I was working for the government, I heard about this test that you could take to get a government job, because that's back then in the 70s, that's the way you got a U.S. government job, was you took a test. And, depending on how you did, they would rate you in different, categories, skills, aptitude, knowledge, so that if you did well on the test, they would know what type of job you were best suited for. And so this test that I heard about was called a PACE, Professional and Administrative Career Exam. And I remember it was mostly women that worked around me that were talking about it one day when I was at work at the IRS, and I remember them talking about how hard it was, and a couple of them had taken it, and that you got 6 different scores in these 6 different categories, aptitude, skills, and if you scored a scale of 70 to 100, if you got below a 70, they just didn't give you a score, because I guess they didn't want to embarrass you. and so I thought, oh wow, that sounds really hard, but hey, I'm about to graduate. I didn't have a job lined up yet. I figured, well, I can work just about anywhere with a business degree from the University of Texas, and so I thought, well, hey, I'll take this test and see what happens. Even though I was kind of worried because I kept hearing how hard it was, and so when you sign up for the test, you indicate, filled out with pencil and paper, you indicate which cities with government agencies you would be interested in locating, working in, if you did well enough to, be offered a job. And so naturally I put Houston, because I lived here. And so it turned out that I took the test, I got my letter back in the mail with the results, and I think I honestly thought that they had made a mistake. They sent me this letter, and it said my 6 scores were 4 100s and 2 98s. I'm almost a perfect score on this test. And so it didn't even occur to me that it might happen. And so what they do, of course, is once you finish the test, they send those scores to all of those government agencies that you indicated you would be interested, in the cities you would be interested in working at. So NASA contacted me and said, hey, would you like to come interview for a job in our business office? And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I never dreamed of something like that. And so, I was like, how about tomorrow? You have an opening. And so one last funny thing about that is, maybe no surprise, the guy, so I obviously came down for an interview as quickly as I could schedule one. The guy who interviewed me was the father of one of my friends in high school. And so, I don't know if that helped or not, but it certainly didn't hurt. And, boy, just again, I felt so lucky and blessed, 42 years. And I was lucky enough. I was one of those people who got up every day actually looking forward to going to work, and never got old. I do remember as I was getting close to retiring, I thought, well, okay, I've only got a few weeks or months left. Maybe, not that I really wanted to, be lazy or anything, but, at 42 years, I'll just kind of coast, It was the end of the year. My retirement day was January 3rd. So, the Christmas holiday, Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays were the, spread out over the last few weeks of my career. And I think there's usually not a lot going on. And anyway, well, it was like my bosses decided to get every last bit of work they could out of me. So, so I was really busy. But anyway, all of that to say, up to the very last day, it was interesting, exciting, and challenging. Never got old or boring. a single day in that 42 years. And so again, I just feel so lucky to have got to have the career that I did, and still feel lucky getting to do the kinds of things I get to do today. And there's so many people who love to hear about it.
Yeah, it's amazing, Herb. You know, your stories are inspirational, and I love your passion, the way you talk about it, and it's just, but you've had such an amazing career, you know, going through all your stuff, all the jobs you've did, but just to kind of highlight, there's kind of lows with the highs, you know, with your career. In 1986, you returned to Johnson. It was less than a month after the Challenger accident. You know, I'm sure that must have been a tough time, you know, for teams like yourself, rebuilding confidence, you know, after going through that, and then jumping back onto, you know, the space flight is hard. For them to get back on track, you know, with launches and getting astronauts back safely into space. Then the Columbia accident in 2003. But part of your career, you supported the Accident Investigation Board, CAIB,
Yes.
and then you were recognised for those efforts. But as part of your career, amazing it is, how difficult was that, you know, to go through those lows as well?
Well, you know, yes, that's certainly part of the story. But even, you know, going back further, Apollo 1 fire that killed Grissom, Chaffee, and White. I was at the time, and still am today, really close, good friends with Gus Grissom's two sons, Mark and Scott. So, you know, back as early, I think that was January of '67. You know, the tragedy, you know, was part of, like you said, spaceflight is hard. So, you know, I still remember that. The day the Challenger exploded, you're right. I was actually, it was I had been assigned to NASA headquarters on a special 1 year detailed, I called it, a special project for 1 year. And I was nearing the end of it. It was going to be my last week there. They had planned a going away celebration for me for that Friday. And I think the Challenger exploded on Tuesday. So they canceled my going away party. But that was the hardest, most difficult day of my entire 42-year career. I will never forget that day. You know, that was the first in-flight tragedy, disaster. And I still remember, I was again at NASA headquarters, and we're all walking around like zombies. You know, we didn't know what to do or say or, you know, how to feel. It was just horrible. And so then, you know, at the end of the week, I came back to Houston, to Johnson Space Center, and yeah, you're right. Then in 2003, I was actually working in the shuttle program. The Columbia accident was on a Saturday, you know, Saturday morning, and of course, you know, I knew Judy Resnick. I did an exercise. She was one of the astronauts that died on Challenger, actually. I knew her better than the others. I was in an exercise class with her. You know, I actually had a crush on her. She was single, I was single. I never dated her or anything, of course, but we were in an exercise class together on Saturday mornings, and so, you know, I felt like I knew her. And then in Columbia, Laurel Clark, my wife was a librarian at a local private school, and Laurel Clark was one of the Columbia astronauts who died, and her son was in my wife's class. And so anyway, you know, there's so many connections there. But the thing about Columbia, you know, at least it was a Saturday, and you know, we weren't all in the office. We had at least, you know, some of the people obviously had to get to work immediately, you know, within hours. They're out, you know, searching the fields, looking for debris and such. But most of us had the rest of the weekend to kind of process that, you know, in our minds. even though the following weeks were really tough. Yeah, so there were certainly some low points in the career, but like you said, though, we always came back. And I've heard several astronauts, even Gus Grissom for one, and I know some of the Challenger accidents. They expressed themselves that, hey, this is hard, but and it's dangerous, but we feel like it's worth it. We're willing to risk our lives to do what we're doing, and I think every astronaut today, certainly not just NASA astronauts, that's part of the deal. I think they all recognize that they risk their life certainly every time they sit on top of one of those rockets, but they're willing to do that, and so that's one reason. As many astronauts as I've become, had the pleasure and opportunity to work with and become friends with and know, I still fanboy. Every time I get to talk to one or be around one, it's just like, wow, this is so cool, because they're just amazing people.
Yeah, we can totally identify with that. And this house, fangirling and Hayden fanboying. We've met plenty of astronauts, so we can totally identify with that.
Yeah, and so Tim Peake is one of, I did get to meet him when he was in Houston at some point for training. I got a photo with him, so yeah. In fact, I don't know, you may know, there's a young woman in the UK who has a website, MajorTim.space, I think it is.
Yeah, they run a young ambassador program.
Yes.
And they do amazing work. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm involved. I'm the patron for that. Actually, what an honor that was. So Al Worden, who was Apollo 15 astronaut, was the patron originally, and when he passed away a couple of years ago, she asked me to take his place, and I'm wow. Oh wow, yeah, sure. What an honor that is. And so yeah, that's just another one of those STEM education things I'm involved in.
In your career as well, like in 1996, you became a team lead for the Space Station Procurement Office, and then you were part of the barter between ESA, Airbus, Super
to get the Super Cuppers.
From way back then, how amazing is it now with the different state agencies working together for one thing? It's not like to be the first, the space race. It's everybody now working together as one.
Yes. Yeah. That was and even today, we'll see how things turn out. But I've always felt very good about the fact that Russia is such a big part of the International Space Station. In fact, I could do a whole other session on this, but I don't know if you remember or realize that we may not have a space station today if we hadn't joined, if we hadn't got the Russians involved in what was back then called the Space Station Freedom. It was just going to be a U.S. program. Our legislature, Congress, wanted to cancel it, so that they had a vote, and it survived by one vote. It was like 220 to 219 or something like that. So we literally came within one vote of the United States Congress canceling the space station program. This was 1991, I think. And so obviously, NASA decided, boy, we're going to have to do something different. And that was because it was, so far over budget and behind schedule. And so the decision was to make it an international space station and get Russia in as a partner, and certainly all of the other, ESA and Japan and Canada and all the others as well. But, and that's just amazing, to hear stories of, the astronauts and their Russian counterparts coming back from the space station, and what an amazing, wonderful relationship they have, and how they make a point to, break bread, as if you will, have dinner together, at certain times, and sometimes they'll go eat on the U.S. side, and other times they'll eat on the Russian side, and work together so well. Notwithstanding all of the political things going on in the real world today, but and it's almost kind of surprising to think that these are the same Russians that live in this place that we're the U.S. is enemies with, if you will.
One thing, do you think that it is important to build on the ISS experience and actually have a replacement for the ISS? Because I believe it's supposed to go out of service around 2026.
Yeah, well, so, and actually I think the latest time frame is that at least I think the U.S. has agreed to go to 2030. But you may know there's a lot of things going on in the commercial sector, even space station wise, whether it's building their own space station or taking parts of because the ISS will be 30 years old by 2030, and I suppose back, when we get to that point, they could deorbit it and it'll burn up like Skylab did. But and I'm not sure how practical it is to take pieces of it and build another space station. But Axiom is a U.S. company that has talked about and thought about doing something like that. Maybe not trying to keep the whole thing, but maybe certain modules or certain parts of the structure, taking some of that and adding on some of their own pieces to it. And so some kind of hybrid space station. And again, 2022, who knows what's going to happen over the next 8 years. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there's not if and when 2030 is coming and it looks like that's the end of the ISS, that there's some type of commercial replacement that wasn't built by NASA, because I think at that point NASA hopefully will be sending people back and forth to the moon. I don't think we'll be on our way to Mars by 2030. In fact, I personally, I'd be surprised if it doesn't take at least another 20 years or so to solve all the problems they're going to have to solve to send somebody to Mars. But that's another story. But yes,
they were hoping to reach, go back to the moon by 2024. And hopefully, inspire in the next generation, the first woman on the moon. Yes. But do you think that's going to happen in 2024?
I do. If not 2024, maybe 2025. I think they're making good progress, and that's certainly something we've done before, although it'll be with a different vehicle. But I haven't seen or heard. Of course, again, I'm not plugged in deeply into all of the details as much as I was when I was an employee there. But I haven't, seen or heard anything that would make me doubt that 2024 is not a reasonable time frame, or again maybe slightly slip the schedule a little bit, and that. We I still like to say we, talking about NASA, we'll be back making multiple trips to the moon.
Yeah.
Well, I really look forward to, the International Space Station over 20 years. We see the amazing views of Earth, but it would be so amazing to see whenever we have like Orion, something orbiting the moon, and we're going to actually see the moon, the craters. We're going to see the details of the moon. We're going to, it's just going to be completely mind-blowing.
Yeah. Yes. I was involved in, if you heard of what was it was called a constellation program. This was, like 2005, 2006, and we were going to go back to the moon with the constellation program, and the program was canceled. However, the rocket, which is today the SLS, and the capsule, which is today Orion, survived, in different forms. But I had actually been assigned to work support the office that was going to develop the new lunar lander, and we had started having meetings, and so once the program was canceled, even though SLS and Orion survived, the lunar lander was dead, and so I moved on to something different. But this was back around, again, like I think the program was canceled in like 2008 or so, and so I was heartbroken.
Yeah, and part of that as well, they talked about as part of the Orion SLS, they were actually going to put into as part of that mission, grabbing an asteroid to study an asteroid, and then they dropped that. But as part of the planetary defense, it's great to see that there's still other ongoing things going on with that.
Yeah, there's a mission. I can't remember what it's called now. They've sent a vehicle out, double asteroid redirection test. They're gonna gonna impact an asteroid, and just all it takes is just a slight bit of impact to if their theory works well enough to change, if they do it early enough to change the trajectory of an asteroid that might be headed towards Earth someday.
Yeah, and that's what Aidan's involved in, and the follow-up with ESA. That's the brilliant thing with the connection with NASA and ESA. Yeah. Hera mission is going to follow the impact. So yeah, it's all exciting. It's all exciting stuff.
Yes.
Do you think it would be nice if, when the CIS Lunar Gateway is built, that perhaps they use the European and American modules on the ISS if the rest of the station is too far gone? I think that's kind of what I was thinking about earlier, is that the space station, I remember even when I was still working, which has been 5 years ago now, it was, at that time it was over 15 years old, and starting to act old. The things needed to be replaced, and systems were failing, and I'm sure that's still happening, somewhat today, but and will continue over the next 8 years. But I don't think that just because it's getting old or older, and that some things are failing, that you have to destroy the whole thing. I would love to see the whatever modules might have another life in some way, even after 2030.
It's old, not obsolete, as they say. It just needs to be modernized.
Yeah.
And Herb, I believe a happy birthday is in order for you.
Yes.
Yes.
We'd all like to wish you a big happy birthday.
Yeah.
It's a big age.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was February 9th. Yeah, and I'm not embarrassed to say I turned 70.
Congratulations.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't believe I lived that long. I joke about it. If I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. In all honesty, and I won't, go in that direction too much. But my family has a history of men dying young.
Oh.
My father had a heart attack and a stroke at 51, and one of my uncles died of a heart attack at 39, and of my father, grandfather, my great grandfather, and 4 male uncles, none of them ever lived to 60.
Wow.
and 56 was the oldest any of those 7 lived. And so to be honest, again, I'm in my 20s and 30s, and I'm thinking, man, if I hit 60, I'll be
Doing well.
Yeah, doing well.
You're breaking the mode.
You're a rock star.
Yeah,
You're a rock star.
Yeah, you are.
It just blows my mind. Just still be going strong at 70. I just hope I can keep it up.
I'm talking of rock star, Herb. You are now. There's lots of people in the space industry are very talented people when it comes to the arts and singing and acting, and you have really impressive career on the stage as well with drama. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's my second love. Oh my gosh! And the funny thing about that is I didn't do any of that when I was growing up or in high school or college. Didn't take drama or anything like that. So that's even NASA related. Back in 1979, one of my NASA friends asked me if I wanted to go see a local theater show with him because his wife was in the cast and he wanted to see the show, but he didn't want to sit by himself, right? So he asked a friend, me, to go along with him. And so I went to see the show, and I fell in love with the theater. I mean, not just in general, but that theater in particular. It was small and intimate, and the people were very talented. It was such a wonderful, fun show. And so, two funny things about that. So I actually ended up dating one of the women who was in the cast.
Lovely.
Actually, 2 maybe.
2.
and so the other thing is I asked, hey, how do I get involved? This looks like a fantastic, wonderful thing. I was young and single at the time, and so they said, well, our next musical is, because I played the trombone, musician too, and they said our next musical is Jesus Christ Superstar. You could play in the orchestra for that. I said, yes, that sounds awesome, because I loved the music. So I did that. I was in the orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar at this same theater, and as the 12 shows, 3 weekends of shows. Playing in the orchestra, which was right next to the stage, I'm sitting there, for each show watching, thinking to myself, I could do that, singing and dancing and acting, I could do that. I feel like I've never been afraid to try anything. And so I auditioned for the next show, which was a musical called Pippin, and I was cast in the show, and that was one of my first shows, and I ended up doing something like 14 shows over the next 4 or 5 years, musicals, comedy, Shakespeare, drama. I did stage manager, lights, sound booth, built sets, anything I could to be a part of that live theater. And then, I got married and had kids, and the job became more, demanding. And so I just didn't have time to devote to the auditions and rehearsals and performances. And so I got out of it for 34 years, actually.
Wow.
So
amazing.
1984 to 2018, and I had retired the year before, and I remember thinking, wait a minute. My sons are grown and out of the house. I'm retired. I can do theater again. And so I hadn't been on stage in 34 years, and I contacted the local theater, and it turned out that one of the women who was a teenager at the time that I had worked with back in the 80s was now on the board of directors for this theater. And so I thought, well, I'll kind of, ease back into it. I'll, kind of get my feet wet, so to speak, and, maybe be a backhand, a backstage hand, or, maybe run the lights or the sound or something. And so I started following what the theater was doing. And so it's Christmas time, and they were doing Miracle on 34th Street. And I had no plans to be in the show. And if you're familiar with the story of the movie, Kris Kringle,
Mm-hmm.
And so one day I didn't go to auditions because, again, I didn't plan to be in the show. And so this woman who's on the board of directors calls me. She said, hey, they had the auditions for A Miracle on 34th Street, and they didn't find a good Kris Kringle. She said, you would be perfect for that. Whoa! No, wait a minute. You didn't hear me. I was going to ease back into this. I wasn't going to jump back in and get the lead in the first show in 34 years. But she talked me into it, and I did it. And I remember being really anxious about that, but I ended up absolutely loving it. It turned out, it's one of my all-time favorite roles now. And so then after that, for the next 3 years or so, I did another 5 or 6 shows, and then the pandemic hit, and the theater we basically shut down. Anyway, I'm now on the board of directors for the theater, but so there aren't quite as many roles or parts for 70-year-old guys as there were, good-looking young guys back in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah. You never know, Herb. Maybe one day, they might make a Netflix or something. The story of Herb Baker.
Yes, absolutely. You can play yourself.
Well, the good news is they're actually when there is a part for an elderly gentleman, there aren't that many of us who show up for auditions. So I have
a good foot in the door. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I do love it. Boy, there's no feeling like being on a live theater stage and performing and having the audience, laugh and respond. Like there's just nothing like it. Yeah.
But it's amazing, Herb. Like the stories you share on your social media. Like we've been following you for a good few years. Mm-hmm. But you have all the NASA side and the space side, and your journey, your drama side. But one thing now I have to mention, or I will get in trouble with Hayden. You were the person that introduced us to NASA Johnson style. Oh, remember that?
Oh,
yeah. You were the one. You sent us a link one day, and you said Hayden will love this. Mm-hmm. So that was our Monday motivation. It was a parody of that song Gangnam Style.
Gangnam Style, yes.
So everybody in NASA and one of Hayden's buddies, Astro Clay, is in it.
He dances.
Oh. But can you just tell us the funny side of NASA? The important jobs you do, but just to give the listeners a lesson, the fun side of what you get up to in NASA as well, or what you did get up to.
Well, yeah. So I think maybe some people have a misperception about working at NASA. I mean, in the sense that it is. And rightfully so, so thought of so highly and have accomplished some just amazing things. But it's just, mostly just regular people. I mean, certainly have some level of, competence and intelligence or you wouldn't get the job. But it what it really comes down to, I think, is someone, who's works hard and is committed and wants to be, have the mission, whatever it is, be successful, and is willing to do whatever it takes and understands that, what we're doing is bigger than just us. And so there's not a lot of, competition amongst individuals trying to get the next promotion. If there's something you can do for the person sitting next to them that will help them, shine or be successful, people will bend over backwards to do that. And so, again, all of that to say, it's just regular people. There's no, there might be a couple of geniuses, if you will, but mostly it's just regular people. And so they have a sense of humor and like to have fun, just like everybody else. And, they don't always, in fact, I guess in some cases, don't want to show it, in the sense that they don't want to have people think that, oh, they're just horsing around. I still remember people at one point, I think it was Mark Kelly, and took a gorilla outfit up.
Yeah.
And that was hilarious, the little video of him flying around the space station in the gorilla outfit.
Yeah, yes.
All kinds of people complaining and arguing that, wow, so this is what NASA's spending our money on. Oh, come on, give us a break.
It was the funniest thing. I remember. He actually, Tim Peake. It was actually Tim Peake when he arrived on the space station, and he got a bacon sandwich made. I think it was only 2 days or a few days into his mission, and there comes flying this gorilla. Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, they try to put a lid on that somewhat, but yeah, absolutely. Some of the most fun, interesting people with the best humor I know, are NASA employees or astronauts. So yeah, there's a lot of that.
I have to admit, one of my fondest memories of the shuttle program was I qualified as a radio amateur in the States back in 2009. So I had Echolink on my computer, and every time there was a launch, I would log into the 2-meter repeater at the Kennedy Space Center, and I'd get this wonderful message: the repeater is locked down at this moment. And because it was being, the whole point was 2 meters, and amateur radio were actually a last resort communication method, not only for the ISS, but for the shuttle astronauts if the main radios on the shuttle failed.
Yeah.
I say it's just one of those really weird things that pops into your mind. You're talking, I thought, oh yeah, I remember this. And this going back a little bit to 1987, when you were with the Space Station Support Program contract.
Yes.
What was it like working with Fred Hayes, who had just been recently appointed president of the Government Space Station Support Division?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I do a lot of speaking, and often I'm asked, what's your favorite memory, or what's one of the highlights of your 42 years, and I got to do a lot. But I think that might be, especially after having been involved with the news media covering Apollo 13 as it happened in 1970, and then fast forward 16, 17 years to that special assignment. That's actually the reason I had gone to the Kennedy Space Center. It was the early days of this space station program, and we needed an integration contractor. They had broken the space station program up into multiple pieces is like a their welfare program for all of the centers, so that everyone had some piece of it, some work to do, but then it had to be all integrated back together. So the Space Station Program Office needed an engineering support contract to integrate all of these various pieces back together, and I was assigned as the contracting officer to award and negotiate and administer this contract. And so that's what I was doing the year I spent at the Kennedy Space Center. We were in a secure facility at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, just off of KSC. And two companies competed, Grumman and TRW, and of course Grumman won, and like you mentioned, when they won, Grumman appointed Fred Hayes, who had left NASA and gone to work for Grumman, because Grumman built the lunar modules, and Fred was a lunar module pilot, and so he had spent much of his NASA career at Grumman, checking out the lunar modules they were building. So there was a natural connection there. And so he was appointed to be like you said, the new president of the Space Station Program Support Division. And so he and I negotiated this 10-year, almost $1 billion Space Station Program Support contract. And I still remember, while we were negotiating, it's all business, right? And I remember, I guess it was after we had finished negotiations, we went out to dinner together. and I remember thinking, I want to talk about Apollo 13. I mean, here's my chance to actually, talk with an Apollo 13 astronaut. And I remember it became clear early in the conversation that he had no desire to talk about Apollo 13. And so I let that go. But he had been in an aircraft accident. His plane crashed and caught on fire, and he had burns, severe burns over much of his body. And I remember him rolling up his sleeve, and he showed me the scars on his arm from that plane crash. He was kind of, interested in talking about, test pilot plane crashes kind of thing, but didn't want to talk about Apollo 13. So anyway, I signed this contract for NASA, and he signed it for Grumman. And one more interesting thing about that is that, and you may have seen the photo, the president and CEO of Grumman was so proud of this $10-year billion space station program support contract that they flew me up to Bethpage, New York, where the corporate headquarters are, to pose for a publicity photo for the company newsletter. And so this photo, I'm standing next to Fred, and I'm 35 years old at the time. I had dark hair. If you look at the photo, you may not recognize me. But the president, so there's a few of us standing behind the desk, and the president of Grumman is sitting at the desk pretending to sign this contract that Fred and I had already signed. So anyway, that was getting to work with and know and become friends with. And now Fred lives just 15 minutes away from me. I actually see him fairly often because he's still a pretty frequent visitor to the Johnson Space Center. And so we've become good friends. I'm actually even good friends with one of his granddaughters now. And he's got a book coming out in April. And I got to talk with him. I was at we do plant a memorial tree in an astronaut memorial grove at the Johnson Space Center for astronauts that have passed away. And Fred spoke at the one for Al Worden. And I was there, and I got to talk with him about the book. And he was kind of frustrated. There were a lot of appendices of Apollo 13 stuff he wanted to include in the book, but the editors and publishing company wouldn't let him do it. So anyway, that was really cool. So that I think getting to work with Apollo 13 astronaut Fred Hayes and become friends with him is absolutely one of the best memories and highlights of my career.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Absolutely wonderful.
It's great to see Fred as well, still active on Facebook. He actually followed us last year. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Just down-to-earth people that just like to see, like-minded people that are passionate about space and sharing a story. It's amazing.
Yes. I'm so happy that he's still going strong. He's like, I don't know, 88 now or something like that. Now, I'm thinking 70 years old,
Yeah. And also, Herb, I just want to make this, a few years ago, you helped Hayden make an impression with Chris Hadfield. You kindly sent Hayden the original, all the mission patches, and Hayden, we went to an event, we met Chris Hadfield. So Hayden showed up in this black flight suit. You had the mission patches, Mission Commander, NASA, all Chris Hadfield's patches.
I remember seeing photos,
Yeah, and Chris Hadfield was blown away. And, and we chatted to him and what you said. I said, Herb Baker, and he was like, oh yeah, everybody, whenever you mention your name, no matter anywhere, everybody knows Herb Baker. But I just had to add that in. Thank you so much again for that. So.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm so happy. I have so much memorabilia, patches and stickers and flown flags and unfortunately, neither of my two grown sons are big space buffs. Certainly they understand and appreciate, what I did and what NASA is doing, but they're not like space geeks like, a lot of people. Although my older son just, about a year ago, married his now wife, and she just got her PhD in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, and so
Wow.
she's definitely a space geek. And so I ended up talking with her about
Yeah.
people and the space program and what she's doing and that kind of thing, much more so than my own two sons. But anyway, all of that to say, I think now at least there might be somebody in the family who would appreciate all of those all of that memorabilia. But at the same time, I'm just so happy to share it with anybody who it would be meaningful to. So yeah.
So not to cause debate on the show, okay? So is it Star Trek or Star Wars? Which one?
It's both.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to, it's like, which son do you love most?
Yes. They're different and both meaningful.
Yeah, so I maybe it's okay to refuse to answer because I love them both.
Yeah.
Very-
So,
Good answer.
I don't see
Good
the difference.
answer. We just had to
Yeah.
ask.
yeah.
Well,
Can't choose one because they do two very different things.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
I'm just about to remind the listeners that at the rollout of the very first orbiter, the Enterprise, the Gene Roddenberry, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and James Doohan were present for that historic day to see the first shuttle named after the USS Enterprise NCC 1701.
Yes, that's right. I've seen lots of photos of that day. Yes, that was awesome.
I think a lot of people in the science fiction community were finally saying, yes, we have finally got a USS Enterprise at last.
Finally. Yeah.
Yes, and it never went into orbit, but they obviously used it for the approach and landing tests. So yeah.
That, I think, was probably the greatest thing that it could have done, because it allowed the astronauts to get used to, from what I would see as a glider,
Yes.
which had to be brought in nose up, so they couldn't see the runway.
Yeah.
It was all instrument based anyway, the landing, because the skids in the wings had to touch first, the chute deployed, and then the nose would drop and touch ground, and that's when they would know they've actually landed, because that's when they would get a zero altimeter reading in the cockpit.
Yeah. Yeah, and so obviously the Enterprise was, help with the proof of the concept that it could fly the back of a 747 to be transported around the country when needed. Yeah.
And of course, it was also great because I don't know how many people who will be listening, are actually aware of things, but the only way the shuttle was too big to go into the guppy, but they could still transport other parts of the parts of the, if I'm remembering right, and I could be wrong on this, the parts of the ISS that were due to be launched were carried by the guppy. I think that was something else you were involved in getting a hold of from Airbus.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's why we did it. We needed. It was It was like 1997, I think, and we needed to transport these large, things that were being built all over the country to the Kennedy Space Center to have them launched, and they didn't want to send them over the roadways or by boat, and so the Super Guppy was perfect in terms of the size and capability to transport those modules, and so that's actually why we did the three-way barter with ESA and Airbus, was so that we could move those ISS pieces to Florida.
In fact, I still believe NASA owns the I think it's 3 RAF Canberras that they were using for atmospheric research. I believe they're still in the air today. I haven't seen much about them recently.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah.
The Canberra was, I believed it was designed as it was an early jet bomber from the late 50s, early 60s. built for the RAF. It was actually they'd actually trialled a seaborne version of a carrier, but then they stuck with the standard version. But most people don't realise that NASA could, if it could prove the need, buy foreign aircraft or equipment for its own uses. And the Canberras they used for atmospheric research for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm just full of useless bits of information like that. Anne, you've been very quiet.
Well, I was just going to ask Herb, do you have any advice for young people starting off today? I mean, life is so different now to how, you know, I'm almost your vintage, so I remember the 60s and the 70s.
Well, yeah. So I'm often asked that question too, and so I guess a couple of things I like to say, and so one is, as I was touching on before, don't think that you're not good enough or smart enough to work for a space agency or in the space program. Again, you know, it's just regular people who, you know, work hard and are committed and want to do a good job. The second one is, and you, being, you know, space geeks yourselves, I suppose, are familiar with the phrase "failure is not an option," and of course that's you probably know that's a line that was created for Gene Kranz in the movie Apollo 13. He never actually said that. It was just a line, again, that was added to the script for dramatic purposes. But of course he's taken it on now, and that's the way he signs things, and his book is titled "Failure is Not an Option," and so, you know, if you're trying to save the lives of 3 astronauts who are, you know, are at risk of dying in a broken spacecraft, that's fine. But for everyday life, you know, you've heard the phrase, I'm sure, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. Absolutely. So to me, I like to say failure is an option. You know, don't be afraid to try something new or be afraid of failing. You know, as the Nike will say, you know, do it or go for it.
Yeah.
I think there's so many people in so many ways, just in life in general, that miss out on things or on opportunities because for some reason they're afraid they won't be picked or won't be selected or won't do well or will fail, and just try, you know, it's easier said than done, but, you know, try to get past that and be bold and go for it. And so, you know, I think, and the reason that I say that is that I wish I had, and I kind of feel like I learned that fairly early in life, but I wish I'd learned it even earlier. Yeah, that's, I think that's the best advice I could give.
A can-do attitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes, and especially for, you know, women in trying to get into jobs that even today, that, you know, are historically men, you know, whether it's taking a course in college or, you know, applying for a job. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it, or, well, you know, I'm not so sure that that's a job for women. Don't listen to that. You know, I've heard so many stories from some of the women astronauts I've come to know and become friends with over the years of how they were discouraged, even, you know, back when they were in college, of, well, you know, I'm not sure engineering is really the right, you know, the study for you, and they, you know, they did it anyway, and you know, became very successful and became astronauts. And so, you know, you just hate to see, again, that's, you know, part of what I do so much now is even though I wasn't a STEM person myself, is promoting STEM education and engagement, and at the same time, because of the other things we talked about with you know, acting and music, those other the arts are important too. So I don't want to, you know, make life so focused on STEM that you ignore everything else, because I absolutely, you know, believe that art and music and acting and all of those other things are important too.
Yeah, because that's what I love about as well. You know, we have the STEM, but the STEAM,
STEAM.
add on the aided arts. That is a
Absolutely.
big important thing, because the arts, whether it be educational, minded people, it connects everybody. So, you know, within space industries, the arts is a big part of careers and jobs, and that being like a communicator, a storyteller, even, you know, telling a story via art, making something. Everybody has a place in space. So the A and the STEAM is definitely a big important aspect.
And so, you know, there are several astronauts who have played musical instruments on the ISS, and Nicole Stott painted on the ISS, and you know, Chris Hadfield wrote a book, you know, fiction book. So authors and artists and musicians, and I think actually that's one of the things that can help you be selected as an astronaut, is to have another interest like that, you know, be good at it, because whether they'll admit it or not, that's one of the things that those committees that select astronauts, you know, look for, is they want, you know, interesting people that have, you know, that are different. And so when they're formed as a crew of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, you know, it's an interesting group of people that will hopefully like each other and enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, Nicole Stott. It was Hayden's 12th birthday, 1st of December. We were on our way to Belfast to Tim Peake to see him. I hadn't a clue about this, and next minute she sent me this photograph. She was in Elephant Island in the Antarctica on a mission.
Yeah, it was
and she actually did a drawing, happy birthday Hayden, her on the boat with the icebergs behind her.
Yes.
And I was like, you know, the space community is just amazing, how the connection, and, you know, and more people need to really get involved. And
yeah, I thought that was really cool. I saw that either she posted it or you posted it, and I saw that and I thought, wow, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That is in Antarctica.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it, but that was the amazement, you know, of the space industry people, normal people that just get each other.
Yeah.
And long may it continue.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Susan, have you got any further questions?
No, everything you said, Herb, is actually very encouraging. Well-rounded person, well-rounded education, and many different interests. Just good advice for everyone in life. You don't have to be a one-trick pony. Have many strings to your bow.
Yes.
And yet, you're right about women. We don't always get maybe as encouraged.
Yes.
Or sometimes you get the kind of the face. You know, people give you a bit of a side face, going, it may not suit you, because it's misogyny is still alive, unfortunately.
Yes.
But I do think there's a huge change, but further to go.
Yes. That's actually one of my favorite volunteering opportunities is an organization called Girls Start. It's for young girls from in kindergarten through high school, but mainly focused on like age 7 to 12, and it's just for girls, and it's activities to get them involved in STEM activities, and you know, encourage them to continue with that. And that's one of the most satisfying, fun things I've got to do over the last few years.
I think encouraging girls and boys, but any child from a young age, to try everything, and don't be nothing to do with gender. Just give it a go and see what you can make of this one. You know.
I wouldn't have gotten to enjoy all of the theater I did if I had been afraid to get on stage and act for the first time. That's just one example.
It was just so inspiring, you know, like yourself, Herb, and people in the industry, you know, even though retired from NASA, you know, people think, oh, putting their feet up, enjoying life on the beach, but no, it's so amazing to see, you know, you're still, the big involvement, you're still so passionate, dedicated, inspiring the next generation. And like, I'm sure I can speak for everybody else, but It's amazing what you do, and we really appreciate it, and so does the future generation.
Thank you. It's very satisfying to me to have something meaningful to do like this.
Well, it's been really great talking with you. We've actually been going for over 1.5 hours.
Oh my goodness.
So this show will get put out in the States through astronomy.fm.
Okay.
But what I'll do is, because I've got you on my Skype now, I'll send you a copy of the complete show, music and all, I'm afraid.
Sounds good.
And that should be with you in the next couple of days. Whilst you were talking about the parasol and everything, and the work your mother did on the parasol, I was doing some quick research. People don't realise that the Apollo suits that went to the moon were actually made by a company in New York. I think it was Dover.
ILC.
Yeah. And
Yes, it's International Latex Corporation. They used to make bras.
yeah, they were the only people that could actually do the required stitching, which was,
Yes.
I believe, one every footfall.
Yes, another one interesting story about that again, and I heard this in that I mentioned that Nicole Stott interviewed me for the Skylab seamstress part, but she also interviewed some of the women who sewed those Apollo suits, and one of them was talking about how after the suits were finished, they X-rayed them to make sure that they hadn't lost a needle in the suit
wow, yeah.
somewhere, because that could cause a bad day if they had.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They reckon the stitching error as small as 1/32 of an inch could mean the difference between life and death for an astronaut.
Yeah, amazing.
It is, and it was a blending of modern technology and a sewing machine that most people's great-grandmothers or grandmothers would have remembered and used at home.
Mm-hmm.
I still have one.
Yeah, my mother had at least two. She
Yeah.
was, as you can imagine, just an amazing seamstress. In fact, after she stopped working for the company, General Electric was the company she was working for when they made the parasol. She wasn't actually a NASA employee. It was NASA had a contract with General Electric to do what they call soft goods. It was just those things made out of fabric and material. And after she finished that job, she started making sails for sailboats. Huge sails. And so she was very used to working in that very large, very heavy materials.
But yeah,
It's a craft, I think, that may be lost. It's amazing.
Well, it just makes you think just how much it was a real joint effort. It wasn't just the companies like Grumman and Northrop and Boeing. It was literally small companies all around the US.
Thousands of them.
And in some respects, it actually boosted. It turned an economic downturn into an economic upswing because of the sheer amount of money that was being invested, and the fact that it was small companies and medium companies that were getting contracts from NASA to do the bits and pieces that nobody really realized was going on.
I think that's true.
So maybe that's a big hint to a lot of countries. You want to get yourself out of an economic downturn, get a good space program going.
Yeah, definitely.
Great economic advice there.
Well, I think we're now at 1 hour 35, and it's been really great having you, Herb. Would you come back again sometime in the near future?
Oh yes, please.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that happens quite often. There are a number of Instagram lives, and I did a podcast the other day, just about a week ago, and at the end of it, the guy said, we're going to have to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
You can't cover everything in
That's
an
right.
hour and a half.
So the answer is yes.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great.
Yay!
Wonderful.
Great.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Again, I do stay pretty busy, and but I can always find time to fit it into my schedule to do something like this. I appreciate the opportunity and the offer to be able to tell stories and talk about these kind of things. So yes, just let me know when a good time to do a follow-on session would be.
Absolutely. Well,
We really,
Thank
we
you
really
so much.
appreciate it, Herb. It's you're
Thank
an
you.
inspiration, and okay, I'm fangirling. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
admit it. We are.
We all are.
We love your story.
We all are, yeah.
one final thing for people who are interested in the failure is not an option quote. There is actually a documentary on the History Channel where they actually speak to a lot of the people involved, not just with Apollo 13, but the whole of the program. Gene Kranz is there, Chris Kraft is there. I'm just trying to get back to my notes, and I believe where are we? No, I'm just trying to... Sorry about it. Oh, yeah. Jerry Bostwick.
Yep.
Wally Schirra actually appears in it. So it is out there on DVD. I've got a copy of it. It's in my home in the US, of all places. I've got to bring that over with me at some point. But it is a really fascinating watch, I will tell you. So if you find a copy, or if you can find it online or on the History Channel, do watch it, because it is really interesting to see, because it takes you from the launch of Sputnik through to the moon missions. It was produced back in 2003.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep. Yep. Chris Kraft was the very first NASA flight director, and today the building that houses Mission Control has his name on it.
Yeah.
So
he was one of those guys who give him a task to do, and he knew what he wanted to do, how he was going to do it, and he would tell you, this is what I need you to do, this is what I need to know by, get it done.
Yeah, absolutely a legend. In fact, that's a story we can do the next time we talk. I was just briefly tell you that I was asked to, as part of a professional organization I belong to arrange an award ceremony to present him with an award, and I ended up contacting John Glenn and Alan Shepard both with that. I won't tell you how it turned out. We'll say that for another
Absolutely. That everybody will have to come back to listen to that
Can't
one.
wait, yeah. Can't wait for episode number 2 now.
Well, so I think the best thing to do is for us all to say good night. So it's good night from me.
Good night from all of us girls here in Ireland.
Yep.
Yeah, it's still middle of the afternoon here in Texas, but yeah, it's great talking with you. Again, thank you so much for the offer and invitation to speak, and we'll see you all again sometime.
Almost.
Thank you.
very
Looking forward to it, Herb.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
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 Bye.